The black waitress switched his glass in silence. The Korean Mafia boss watched, realizing she'd saved his life. She had one chance. One quiet moment to choose between keeping her head down or trusting her instincts. One decision that would connect her world to his in ways neither of them could predict. Her name was Funk. She was a single mother working behind the bar at Blue Lantern, an upscale Korean lounge where crystal lights reflected off expensive whiskey and powerful men spoke in whispers. On that close-for-business night, she was just trying to get through her shift, count her tips, and catch the bus home to her 7-year-old son. She wasn't looking for trouble. She wasn't looking to be anyone's savior. But sometimes life doesn't care what you're looking for. Sometimes it puts a cloudy glass in front of you and forces you to decide who you really are in that single breath between seeing and acting. And Funk, she made a choice that saved a mafia boss's life without speaking a single word. This is her story. And I promise you, by the end, you'll never look at silence the same way again. Because what started with a switched glass ended with everything changing. Stay with me. You need to hear this. Hello my friends and loved ones. Thanks for joining me on this beautiful story. As we continue this story, kindly take a moment to subscribe to this channel, like the video, and I love to always hear from you. Where are you watching from and what time is it at your end right now? Thank you for subscribing. Let me tell you about a woman named Funk. She was just like so many of us, working hard, trying to survive, doing everything she could for the person she loved most. Funk stood behind the bar with aching feet and a polite smile she had learned to wear like armor. If you passed her on the street, you probably wouldn't notice her. That was exactly how she'd learned to survive. In her world, being invisible meant being safe. She worked at Blue Lantern, one of those upscale Korean lounges tucked between glass towers downtown, where a single bottle of imported whiskey costs more than most people make in a week. The kind of place where crystal lights sparkle under dim chandeliers, where soft jazz floats through the air, where men who speak quietly carry power in their posture. But Funk wasn't thinking about any of that elegance. She was thinking about her feet. They ached in her worn work shoes. She'd been standing for 6 hours already, and she still had 2 more to go. But she kept smiling. She kept moving. Because that's what you do when you have no choice. You see, Funk had a son, a beautiful little boy named Iamide, just 7 years old. With a laugh that could light up a room and lungs that sometimes struggled to breathe. Iamide was Funk's whole world. Everything she did, every hour she worked, every smile she forced when exhaustion pulled at her bones, it was all for Iamide. For his inhaler. For his next doctor's visit. For the chance at a better life. Funk's life wasn't easy. She counted tips in the bathroom before her bus ride home, praying they would stretch far enough to cover her son's asthma medication for the week. Every penny went into survival mode. Every shift brought her one day closer to stability she could barely imagine. But that night, everything changed. Blue Lantern was closed to the public. The air felt different, heavier, dangerous, expensive. Only one table was occupied, and everyone who worked there knew what that meant. Don't ask questions. Just serve. Just listen. Just survive. Funk moved through her duties like a ghost, carrying trays, pouring drinks, always watching, always ready to serve. That's when she saw him. His name was Ji-hun. And even if you didn't know who he was, you could feel his presence. He sat at the center of a half-circle booth near the back, surrounded by 4 other Korean men in tailored jackets. He didn't speak much, he didn't need to. His presence alone bent the room. Calm eyes. Controlled breathing. The kind of man who never rushed because the world always waited for him. Ji-hun wasn't just powerful. He was whispered about. Businessmen disappeared after crossing him. Deals shifted when he entered a room. Some people called him a ghost. Others called him a king. But everyone agreed on one thing. Ji-hun was someone you didn't mess with. Funk watched as her manager moved nervously near the entrance. She felt the energy in the room shift. Like everyone suddenly stood a little straighter, moved a little quieter. Her manager called her over, his voice low and urgent. Funk, you're serving them tonight. This is important. Do you understand? Perfect service. Absolute silence about anything you see or hear. Funk nodded. She understood. In her time at Blue Lantern, she'd learned that some tables required more than just good service. They required you to be deaf and blind to whatever was discussed. The booth was positioned strategically, Ji-hun's back to the wall so he could see everything. Four other men joined him. His right-hand man Min-sik, sharp-eyed and watchful, Dong-hyun and two others, all speaking in that careful way that means something more than what they're actually saying. Funk approached carrying a tray of drinks, imported whiskey, neat, poured exactly to specification. She moved quietly, professionally, trying to be invisible like always. But something felt different tonight. Something in the air made her nervous, though she couldn't explain why. As she set down the glasses, she noticed something. Something small. Something most people would miss. One glass, Ji-hun's, was slightly cloudy at the bottom. Her fingers froze for half a second. Her heart began to race. She remembered her father's voice from years ago, back in a tiny kitchen miles away from this city. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Silence can kill faster than noise. Funk's instincts, sharpened by years of surviving, of reading danger, of knowing when something was wrong. Those instincts were screaming at her. Something about that glass wasn't right. She pushed the thought away. It was nothing. She was being paranoid. She had no idea that in the next 60 seconds, she would make a choice that would save a man's life and change her own forever. Sometimes the most important moments of our lives arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary seconds. We don't know we're standing at a crossroads. We don't know that everything is about to change. Funk didn't know, but she was about to find out. But before that glass, before that night, before everything changed, let me tell you who Funk really was. Because heroes don't announce themselves. They don't wear capes or carry signs. Sometimes they're just tired women in worn shoes, carrying trays and prayers in equal measure. Funk hadn't always been invisible. There was a time years ago when she'd been louder, brighter. A young woman with dreams that stretched beyond survival. She'd had plans once, nursing school, a career, a future that felt solid beneath her feet. Then life happened. A relationship that started sweet and ended bitter. A man whose love turned into control, whose words became weapons. She'd stayed longer than she should have, hoping things would change, believing she could fix what was broken. Then Iamide was born. And suddenly, Funk had something more precious than her own safety to protect. She'd left with her son in her arms and nothing else. No money, no plan. Just a fierce determination that her boy would grow up in a home where love didn't come with bruises. That was 3 years ago. Since then, she'd learned the art of disappearing. She'd learned that invisible people live longer. That women who keep their heads down, who smile politely and never ask questions, who move through rooms like smoke, those women survived. Every morning, Funk woke at 5. She made Iamide breakfast, packed his lunch, walked him to her neighbor's apartment before school. Mrs. Chun was kind older, understood what it meant to struggle. She watched Iamide after school for almost nothing. A grace Funk repaid with groceries when she could afford them. Then Funk worked. Blue Lantern at night. A diner during lunch hours when she could pick up shifts. Every dollar went into envelopes hidden under her mattress. Rent, food, medicine. Iamide's asthma medication cost more than her weekly groceries. She'd learned to choose. Some weeks, she ate less so he could breathe easier. In the bathroom at Blue Lantern, between shifts, she counted tips with trembling fingers. $43 tonight. $52 last night. If she could just get to $500 by month's end, she could cover the prescription refill and still make rent. The math never quite worked, but she tried anyway. At Blue Lantern, Funk had learned other lessons too. The restaurant attracted a certain kind of clientele. Men who wore expensive suits and carried themselves like wolves in tailored clothing. Men who spoke in Korean, in whispers, in codes she didn't try to decipher. The rules were simple, repeated by the manager on her first day. Don't ask questions. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't notice anything. And whatever you do, never, never, repeat what you hear. Funk followed those rules like gospel. She'd seen what happened to people who forgot them. A server fired without explanation. A bartender who simply stopped showing up. In this world, curiosity was dangerous. Silence was survival. She'd learned to read the room without appearing to look. She'd learned to recognize the dangerous ones, not by their volume, but by their quiet. The men who controlled rooms with a glance. The ones whose presence made other powerful men nervous. Tonight, 5 such men sat in the half-circle booth. Jaehoon at the center, impossibly still, dark eyes that tracked everything. To his right sat Min-sik, his right-hand man. Everyone whispered. Lean and sharp-eyed, the kind of man who noticed when you breathed wrong. He watched Funk now as she prepared their drinks, his gaze clinical, assessing. Dong-hyun sat across from him, younger but no less dangerous. There was something coiled about him, like a spring waiting to release. The other 2 men were older, quieter, observing more than speaking. Funk approached with the tray of whiskeys, her heart beating steady through practiced calm. This was just another table. Just another night. Just another. She set the glasses down carefully, one by one. That's when she saw it. The liquid in Jaehoon's glass separated slightly at the bottom. A faint cloudiness that didn't belong. Chemical residue maybe. Or worse. Her breath caught. Her father's voice echoed across years. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. But her manager's voice was louder. Don't notice anything. Min-sik's eyes locked onto her face. Is there a problem? The world narrowed to this moment. This impossible choice between silence and action, between survival and something she couldn't quite name. Funk's mouth went dry. Everything depended on what she said next. Funk's eyes fixed on that glass for a heartbeat too long. The whiskey should have been amber clear, smooth as silk under the crystal lights. But this one Jaehoon's had something wrong with it. A faint cloudiness pooled at the base, like oil refusing to mix with water. The liquid separated in a way that made her stomach turn. She'd worked bars long enough to know. Alcohol didn't behave like that. Not naturally. Oh God. Her mind raced through possibilities. Contaminated bottle? No, she'd poured from the same bottle for the others. Dirty glass? Impossible. Everything at Blue Lantern was inspected twice before service. Which left only one explanation. Someone had put something in that drink. Panic flooded her chest, cold and sharp. Her fingers trembled against the tray. Every instinct screamed at her to set it down and walk away. To follow the rules. To stay invisible. Don't notice anything. But she had noticed. And now what? If she said something and was wrong, she'd be fired. Worse, she'd embarrass powerful men who didn't tolerate embarrassment. She thought of Iamide, of his medication, of the rent due in 12 days. If she said nothing and was right. Her father's face flashed in her memory. She was 9 years old, standing in their kitchen back home. He'd been teaching her about plants, about which ones healed and which ones killed. Baby girl, he'd said, holding up an innocent-looking root. Sometimes the most dangerous things look harmless. And sometimes staying quiet about danger. That silence can kill faster than any poison. She'd never forgotten those words. Now they thundered in her skull. Is there a problem? Min-sik's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. His eyes were on her face, sharp and suspicious. The kind of eyes that caught lies before they left your mouth. Funk swallowed hard. Her throat felt like sandpaper. She could feel all 5 men watching her now. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. This was the moment. Speak or stay silent. Risk everything or risk nothing. Except doing nothing was also a risk, wasn't it? No, she heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. She lowered her eyes, submissive, unthreatening. Just, let me replace that. It doesn't look right. The silence that followed felt like thunder. Min-sik leaned forward slightly. We didn't ask for a replacement. His tone carried weight, a warning, a test, a threat all rolled into one. Funk's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd broken protocol. Spoken without being asked. Questioned something she had no business questioning. This was it. She was going to be fired. Or worse. Then Jaehoon moved. Just his hand, lifted slightly from the table in a gesture so small it was almost invisible. But Min-sik stopped immediately. Stopped leaning. Stopped talking. Stopped breathing, it seemed. Jaehoon's eyes settled on Funk. They weren't angry. They weren't kind either. They were measuring. Calculating. Reading her the way she'd learned to read dangerous rooms. 4-3 heartbeats. Nobody moved. Then Jaehoon spoke, his voice quiet as falling snow. Go on. 2 words. Permission. Or a test. Funk nodded once and turned away. her legs shaking beneath her uniform. She walked back to the bar on autopilot, her mind screaming at her to breathe, to think, to figure out what came next. Her hands trembled as she poured a fresh glass from the same bottle. Clean. Clear. The way whiskey should look. She placed both glasses on her tray, the new one and the poisoned one, and returned to the table. This was the moment. She could still back down. Could serve the drinks as they were. Could choose silence. But her father's voice echoed again. Silence can kill. So she made her choice. As she set the drinks down, her movements were smooth, practiced, invisible. She placed the clean glass in front of Ji-hun with her right hand while her left hand slid the cloudy one to the edge of the table, near where Dong-hyun sat, as if it had always been meant for him. No annoncement. No explanation. Just a subtle shift of position, so small that if you blinked, you'd miss it. But Ji-hun didn't blink. His eyes tracked her hands with absolute precision. He saw exactly what she'd done. She could feel his gaze like a physical weight. Funk stepped back to her position near the bar, her pulse roaring in her ears. The conversation resumed around the table, but something had changed. The air felt different now, charged, waiting. Ji-hun lifted the new glass and took a slow sip. His eyes never left Funk's face. And in that moment she knew. He understood. The room held its breath. The conversation picked up again, smooth as if nothing had happened. Numbers floated across the table. Territories discussed in careful code. Min-sik mentioned a property in Koreatown, something about permits and partnerships. Dong-hyun nodded along, adding comments about logistics, about timelines that needed to be moved up. To anyone watching, it looked like a normal business dinner. But Funk couldn't breathe normally. She stood near the bar, hands clasped behind her back, face carefully neutral. Inside, her mind was screaming. Every second felt like an hour. Every glance from the table felt like a judgment. What have I done? She'd broken every rule. Interfered without permission. Made a decision that wasn't hers to make. And for what? A gut feeling? A cloudiness in a glass that might have been nothing? Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe the stress was getting to her. Maybe. Ji-hun lifted his glass and took another slow sip. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. The kind of man who never rushed because time itself waited for him. He set the glass down with a soft click against the table. His eyes found hers across the room. Just for a second. But that second felt eternal. He knows what I did. Funk's stomach twisted. She forced herself to look away. To focus on wiping down an already clean counter. Her hands moved mechanically while her mind raced through possibilities. Best case. He'd ignored her presumption. Worst case. She'd be escorted out by security the moment this dinner ended. She thought of Iamide. Of his inhaler. Of the envelope under her mattress that was still $40 short of rent. Please. Please let this be nothing. The men continued talking. Something about shipping schedules. About a warehouse near the port. Min-sik's voice was steady, professional, as he outlined a timeline. Then Dong-hyun reached across the table. His hand moved casually toward the glass at the edge. The one Funk had slid away from Ji-hun. The poisoned one. Time seemed to slow. Funk's breath caught in her throat. She watched frozen, as Dong-hyun's fingers wrapped around the crystal. She should say something. Should warn him. Should. Don't. One word. Ji-hun's voice cut through the conversation like a knife through silk. Everyone stopped. Dong-hyun's hand froze halfway to his lips, the glass suspended in air. Min-sik's eyes snapped to Ji-hun, alert, reading the room instantly. The older men went silent, their business discussion evaporating. Ji-hun didn't raise his voice. Didn't move quickly. He simply reached out with one finger and pushed the glass away from Dong-hyun with a gesture so casual it looked lazy. But there was nothing lazy about the command underneath. Dong-hyun set the glass back down slowly, confusion flickering across his face. Hyungnim. Ji-hun didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the glass for a long moment, then lifted to sweep across the table. Calculating. Assessing. Reading each face like pages in a book only he could understand. Funk felt the air pressure change. This wasn't just about the drink anymore. This was about control. About power. About a man who saw everything and revealed nothing until he chose to. Min-sik leaned back slightly, his sharp eyes moving between Ji-hun and the glass. Understanding dawned slowly on his face, subtle, but there. The room held its breath. Ji-hun picked up his own glass, the clean one, and examined it in the light. Then he glanced at the one he'd pushed away. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something cold and calculating. He knew. Of course he knew. Men like Ji-hun didn't survive in his world by missing details. He'd probably known the moment she'd switched them. Had probably been watching, testing, seeing what she would do next. And she'd just revealed that she'd seen something she shouldn't have. Funk's hands gripped the counter behind her back, so hard her knuckles went white. She kept her face blank, kept breathing, kept pretending she was invisible. But she could feel Ji-hun's awareness of her like heat from a fire. The conversation tried to resume. Min-sik asking about the warehouse again, someone mentioning contracts, but the ease was gone. Everyone at that table knew something had shifted. They just didn't know what yet. Then Ji-hun's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed. Not panic. Not fear. Men like Ji-hun didn't panic. But something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, confirmation, a puzzle piece clicking into place. He stood slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate. "Meeting's over," he said quietly. The four men rose immediately, no questions asked. And Funk knew, with absolute certainty, that her life had just changed forever. She just didn't know if she'd survive the change. The men filed out like shadows, their expensive shoes silent against the floor. Funk stayed frozen behind the bar, every muscle in her body screaming at her to disappear. To slip into the kitchen. To go anywhere but here. But Min-sik didn't leave. He stood near the entrance, watching the others go. When the door closed behind them, he turned. His eyes locked onto Funk with the precision of a predator who'd just spotted prey. "You," he said, his voice low. "Come here." Funk's stomach dropped through the floor. This was it. The consequences she'd been dreading. Her hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron. A useless gesture. Something to do while her world collapsed. She stepped forward on legs that felt like water. Min-sik moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. He wasn't tall, but he didn't need to be. Authority radiated from him like heat. "Why did you switch the glass?" Each word was precise, controlled. A question that demanded truth. Funk's mouth went dry. She could lie. Should lie. Make up something about a smudge, about protocol, about anything that didn't involve her noticing what she shouldn't have noticed. But lying to men like this felt more dangerous than the truth. "I've seen it before," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The way the liquid separated. Chemical residue at the base. It didn't look safe. Min-sik's eyes narrowed. "You've seen poison before?" "My father," Funk stopped, swallowed. "He was a pharmacist. Back home. He taught me to recognize when substances don't mix properly." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. Min-sik stared at her, reading her face like a document he was searching for lies in. The silence stretched, taut as wire. Then footsteps. Ji-hun returned from wherever he'd stepped away to. He held his phone loosely in one hand, his expression carved from stone. He stopped a few feet away and looked at Funk directly. "Lab confirmed it," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Poison. Fast-acting. Ricin derivative. Would have stopped my heart in under 3 minutes." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Funk felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Her suspicion, her reckless, dangerous suspicion had been right. Someone had tried to kill him. And she'd stopped it. The silence that followed was deafening. Ji-hun studied her face. Not as staff, not as something beneath him, but as a human being who had made a choice that mattered. "You knew," he said. Not a question. A statement. Funk shook her head slightly. "I suspected. Enough to act. Without asking permission." Ji-hun's eyes didn't leave hers. "Without raising alarm. Without drawing attention." "People like me don't accuse people like you," Funk said softly. Her voice trembled but held steady. "We just move quietly. We survive by not making noise." Something flickered in Ji-hun's expression. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ji-hun nodded once slowly. "That silence saved my life." The words hung in the air, simple and profound. He turned to Minsik, his voice shifting to command. Find out who tampered with the drink. Start with the suppliers. Check everyone who had access to that bottle. I want names by morning. Minsik nodded and pulled out his phone, already moving toward the door. Consider it done. The door closed behind him, leaving Funk alone with Ji-hun. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't know if she should leave, stay, speak, or remain silent. Every instinct told her to make herself invisible again. But Ji-hun's gaze held her in place. He took a step closer, not threatening, but deliberate. Reading her the way he'd been reading her all night. You have a family? He asked. The question caught her off guard. Personal. Unexpected. Funk hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Asson. I. He's 7. Ji-hun's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. Just barely. Just enough to be human. Just you and him? Just us, Funk confirmed quietly. Ji-hun was silent for a moment, considering. Then he reached into his jacket, slow, deliberate, giving her time to see the movement wasn't a threat. He pulled out a card. Plain black. No name. Just a number embossed in silver. He placed it gently on the bar between them. If anyone ever threatens you, he said, his voice low and absolutely serious, you call this number. Funk stared at the card, afraid to touch it. Afraid of what accepting it might mean. Ji-hun met her eyes. You saw danger and acted without asking who I was or what it would cost you. That matters. He turned to leave, his footsteps measured and calm. Then he paused at the door. One more thing, he said, not looking back. What you earn here. Does it take care of your son? Funk's throat tightened. The truth sat heavy on her tongue. Not always, she whispered. Ji-hun nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. Then he was gone. And Funk stood alone in the empty restaurant, staring at a black card that felt like it weighed more than the world. Funk stood in the empty restaurant, the silence pressing against her ears like water. The black card sat on the bar where Ji-hun had placed it. Plain. Elegant. Terrifying. She stared at it without touching it, as if contact might seal some invisible contract she didn't understand. Her hands still trembled from adrenaline, from fear, from the weight of what had just happened. She'd saved a man's life. A dangerous man. A man whose world operated by rules she couldn't begin to comprehend. And now he'd given her a piece of that world. Funk finally reached out with shaking fingers and picked up the card. The material felt expensive, thick, textured, substantial. The kind of thing that costs more to produce than she made in a week. Just a number. No name. No explanation. If anyone ever threatens you, you call this. The implication was clear. Accepting this card meant accepting Ji-hun's protection. And protection for men like him always came with strings attached. Always came with a price. She thought of Iamide. Of his small body curled on their second-hand couch. His inhaler always within reach. Of the way he looked at her like she could fix anything, solve any problem. Keep him safe from a world that had never been kind to people like them. Could she afford to say no? Could she afford to say yes? Her father's voice echoed again, different words this time. Be careful whose debts you carry, baby girl. Some debts can't be repaid with money. But Ji-hun hadn't asked for anything. Hadn't demanded gratitude or loyalty or silence. He'd simply acknowledged what she'd done and offered. What? Protection? A lifeline? Insurance? She slipped the card into her apron pocket, the weight of it heavy against her hip. The restaurant felt different now. The crystal lights that had sparkled before now seemed harsh. The elegant furnishings looked cold. This place, this beautiful, expensive place, had nearly been the site of a murder. And she'd stopped it. The thought made her dizzy. Someone had tried to kill Ji-hun. Someone with access. Someone who knew his preferences, his routine, his exact drink order. Someone close enough to poison a glass and confident enough to believe they'd get away with it. Which meant that person was still out there. Still dangerous. Still capable of trying again. And now that person might know about her. The waitress who'd switched the glasses. The woman who'd interfered. Oh God. Fear bloomed fresh in her chest, replacing the fading adrenaline. She'd thought the danger was over once Ji-hun left. But it wasn't over. It was just beginning. What if whoever poisoned that drink came back? What if they realized she'd been the one to stop their plan? What if they decided loose ends needed to be tied up? She thought of Iamide again, of his smile, his laughter, his complete trust that his mother would always come home. Her legs felt weak. She gripped the bar for support. The black card in her pocket suddenly felt less like protection, and more like a target painted on her back. She'd stepped into something bigger than a single night, bigger than one choice. She'd stepped into a world where people killed quietly, where power moved in shadows, where courage could get you protected or eliminated depending on whose side you'd unknowingly chosen. And she had chosen a side, hadn't she? The moment she switched that glass, she'd chosen. The restaurant door opened. Funk's heart leapt into her throat. But it was just the manager, returning from wherever he'd disappeared to during the private meeting. His face was pale, his movements nervous. "You can go home," he said quietly, not meeting her eyes. "Your shift is over." Funk nodded, not trusting her voice. She untied her apron with numb fingers, gathered her things from her locker, and walked out into the night. The city was alive with lights and movement. Cars streaming past, people laughing on sidewalks, music drifting from bars. Normal life. Safe life. Life that didn't involve poison and black cards and men whose names were whispered with fear. Funk walked to her bus stop, her hand unconsciously touching her pocket where the card sat. Protection, Ji-hun had called it. But protection from what, exactly? From whoever had tried to kill him. Or from him. She didn't know. Couldn't know. Could only hope that saving one life wouldn't cost her the only life that truly mattered, her son's. The bus arrived. She climbed on, found a seat near the back. And as the city blurred past the windows, Funk realized something that made her blood run cold. She'd become visible. And in her world, visible people didn't survive long. Funk didn't sleep that night. She lay in the darkness of her tiny apartment, listening to Iamide's breathing in the next room. That soft wheeze that never quite went away, even with medication. The black card sat on her nightstand, catching streetlight from the window. Every sound made her jump. Every car passing below. Every footstep in the hallway. She kept expecting consequences. Kept waiting for the knock on the door that would change everything again. But morning came quietly. She made Iamide breakfast. Walked him to Mrs. Chen's. Went through the motions of a normal day, while her mind spun in circles. That afternoon, she arrived at Blue Lantern for her shift. The manager was waiting. He looked nervous, more nervous than usual. His hands fidgeted with a clipboard, and he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "Funk," he said, his voice tight. "There's been a change." Her stomach dropped. "This is it. I'm being let go." "You're being transferred," he continued quickly. "Private dining service. Executive level." Funk blinked. "What? Triple your current pay rate?" He swallowed hard, like the words tasted strange. "Effective immediately. It's orders from the top." The world tilted slightly. Triple pay. That was, she did the math quickly in her head. That was enough for rent and medication. With money left over. Actual money left over. Why? The word came out before she could stop it. The manager finally met her eyes. "I don't ask those questions. Neither should you." He handed her a new uniform. Higher quality fabric, better cut. And a schedule that showed fewer hours but significantly more money. Funk took them with numb hands. "One more thing," the manager said, lowering his voice. "Check your phone." She pulled it out, confused. The banking app showed a notification. She opened it with trembling fingers. Her rent balance, 0. Paid in full. She stared at the screen, not breathing. Don't ask," the manager repeated. "Just accept it." He left her standing there, holding a new uniform and a phone that showed an impossible gift. That evening, Funk picked up Iamide from Mrs. Chen's and took him to the pharmacy. "We need to refill your prescription," she told the pharmacist. The woman scanned the bottle, then frowned at her computer. "It shows 0 copay. Insurance is covering everything." That's not right," Funk said. "We don't have that kind of insurance." The pharmacist clicked through screens. "Well, according to this, you do now. Premium coverage. No deductible." Funk felt tears prick her eyes. She collected the medication, 3 months' worth, more than she'd ever been able to afford at once, and walked home in a daze. That night, she listened to Iamide breathe. No huese, no struggle. Just easy, peaceful breathing. She cried silently in the darkness, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude and a fear she couldn't name. Someone had done this. Someone powerful had reached into her life and fixed the things that were breaking her. And she knew exactly who. 3 days later, Funk received a text from an unknown number. Private meeting room. 3 p.m. tomorrow. Come alone. Her hands shook as she read it. The next afternoon, she stood outside a door she'd never been allowed to enter before. The one on the top floor of Blue Lantern, where only certain people were permitted. She knocked softly. Come Jihoon's voice. Funk opened the door. The room was elegant. Dark wood leather chairs, windows overlooking the city. And sitting at a table near the center was Jihoon, hands folded calmly, eyes tracking her entrance. He gestured to the chair across from him. Funk sat, her heart pounding. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Jihoon leaned forward slightly. So he said quietly, I need someone who notices details. Someone who acts quietly. Someone who understands what it means to protect life without recognition. Funk's breath caught. I'm opening a foundation, Jihoon continued, his voice measured and precise. Front-facing. Legal. Medical outreach. Food programs. Community support. He paused. But I need people who can be trusted. People who see what others miss. People who act when action matters. He slid a folder across the table. Funk stared at it, afraid to touch it. Open it, Jihoon said. With trembling hands she did. Inside was a job offer. A real one. Salary that made her current triple pay look like pocket change. Health insurance. Premium coverage for her and Iamide. Retirement benefits. Stability. Things she'd stopped dreaming about years ago. I'm just a waitress, Funk whispered. Jihoon shook his head slowly. No. You're someone who saved a life without making a sound. You're someone who saw danger and acted despite every reason to stay silent. That's not just anything. He leaned back, his dark eyes holding hers. The question is, are you willing to step out of the shadows? Funk thought of Iamide, of his laughter, of his dreams, of the future she'd been fighting to give him one exhausted shift at a time. She thought of her father's words, silence can kill, but so can staying invisible forever. She looked at Jihoon, this dangerous man who'd somehow seen her, truly seen her, in a moment that mattered. And she made her choice. Yes, she said. Jihoon watched her with that same careful attention he'd given everything that night. Reading. Measuring. Understanding. The foundation, he said, pulling out another document, will focus on 3 things. Medical accessibility for low-income families. Food security programs in underserved neighborhoods. And emergency support for people who fall through the cracks. He laid the document between them. Funk could see organizational charts, budget projections, mission statements written in clean, professional language. People like you, Jihoon continued quietly. The words hit harder than she expected. I've built an empire, he said, his voice matter-of-fact, without pride or shame. I've accumulated resources. But resources mean nothing if they don't serve a purpose beyond accumulation. He gestured to the folder in front of her. You would oversee community outreach. Work directly with families. Identify needs. Allocate resources. You'd have a team, social workers, medical coordinators, logistics staff. But you'd be the one making decisions about who gets helped and how. Funk's mind reeled. I don't have qualifications for that. I don't have a degree. I don't have. You have something more valuable than a degree, Jihoon interrupted gently. You have lived experience. You know what it means to count every dollar. To choose between medicine and rent. To lie awake at night wondering if your child will be okay. He leaned forward, his intensity focused but not overwhelming. Most people in positions of power don't understand the people they're trying to help. They have good intentions but no context. No instinct. They see numbers on spreadsheets, not human beings making impossible choices. His eyes held hers. You would understand. And more than that, you would care. But why me? Funk's voice cracked slightly. You don't know me. One night. One choice. That's not enough to. That one night told me everything I needed to know, Ji-hun said firmly. You saw danger. You acted despite fear. You protected someone without asking for recognition or reward. You moved with precision and discipline under pressure. He stood, walking to the window overlooking the city. Do you know how rare that is? Most people freeze. Or they create chaos trying to be heroes. Or they act out of self-interest disguised as morality. He turned back to her. You didn't freeze. You didn't announce yourself. You simply did what needed to be done, and accepted the consequences. That's not the behavior of just a waitress. That's the behavior of someone who understands responsibility. Funk felt tears threatening. I'm just trying to survive. To take care of my son. Exactly, Ji-hun said. You understand survival. You understand what it means when systems fail people. You understand the difference between existing and living. He returned to his seat, his voice softening. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking you to be exactly what you already are. Someone who sees people others don't see. Someone who acts when action matters. Someone who protects quietly. The silence stretched between them. Funk looked at the folder again. At the salary. At the benefits. At the job description that seemed impossible for someone like her. Community outreach director. Someone who protects quietly. What if I fail? She whispered. Then you'll fail while trying to help people, Ji-hun said simply. Which is more than most people ever do. He pulled out a pen and placed it on top of the folder. I'm not offering you charity, Funk. I'm offering you a position. One that comes with expectations and responsibilities. You'll work hard. You'll make difficult decisions. You'll carry weight. He paused. But you'll also have the resources to change lives. Including your own. Funk thought of Iamide. Of the playground he'd never been able to run across without his breathing becoming labored. Of the dream she'd whispered to him at night. Someday, baby, things will be better. She thought of her father, who'd taught her to see danger and act with courage. She thought of every other parent out there, counting tips in bathroom stalls, choosing between food and medicine, living one emergency away from disaster. People like her. People she could help. Her hand moved before her mind fully caught up. She picked up the pen. When do I start? She asked. Something that might have been approval flickered across Ji-hun's face. Monday, he said. But first there's training. Security protocols. Financial management. Team coordination. He slid a business card across the table. This one with a name and title. My assistant will handle the details. Funk nodded, her hand still trembling slightly as she signed the contract. When she finished, Ji-hun stood and extended his hand. She took it. His grip was firm, respectful. Welcome to the team, he said. You're not invisible anymore. Funk left the building that afternoon with a folder under her arm, and a future she'd never imagined. The sun felt warmer on her face. The city looked different. Not just a place to survive, but a place she might actually be able to change. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a protector. And for the first time in years she believed that maybe, just maybe, silence wasn't the only way to survive. Sometimes action saved lives. Including your own. 6 months later, Funk stood at the edge of a playground she'd helped build. Not with her own hands. Though she'd been there for the groundbreaking, the planning meetings, every discussion about safety features and accessibility. But with decisions. With resources. With the kind of quiet determination that turned paperwork into something real. The playground sat in the heart of a neighborhood most city officials had forgotten. Bright colors against gray concrete. Swings that moved smoothly. Slides that didn't have sharp edges or rust. A small splash pad for summer. Benches where tired mothers could rest. And children. So many children. Their laughter rose into the afternoon air like music. Funk watched them run, climb, play without fear or limitation. She saw mothers sitting together, sharing food, sharing stories, sharing the kind of community that poverty usually stole. And there, in the center of it all, was Iamide. Running. Really running. Not the careful, measured movements of a child who couldn't quite catch his breath. Not the hesitant steps of someone always aware of their inhaler's location. Just running. Free and fast and fearless. His laughter carried across the playground, and Funk felt tears sting her eyes. This was what safety looked like. What stability created. What happened when someone decided that invisible people deserved to be seen. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. Next site visit scheduled for Thursday. 3 families approved for emergency housing assistance. She smiled and typed back confirmation. The foundation had grown faster than anyone expected. Medical clinics in 4 neighborhoods now. Food distribution programs feeding 200 families weekly. Emergency funds that kept people from choosing between electricity and medicine. And Funk, the woman who'd counted tips in bathroom stalls, now made decisions that changed lives daily. She still didn't have a fancy degree. Still didn't fit the profile of someone who should hold this kind of responsibility. But she had something more valuable. She understood the people she served. She saw them. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible. And she made sure they weren't invisible anymore. Manga. Iamide called, waving from the top of the climbing structure. Look how high. Funk waved back, her heart full in a way she'd never experienced before. This was peace. This was purpose. This was what happened when one quiet choice rippled outward into something bigger than survival. Across the street, a black sedan sat idling. Ji-hoon watched from the back seat, his expression unreadable. He saw the playground his money had funded. Saw the children his resources had freed. Saw Funk, the waitress who'd saved his life, now saving others in her own way. Power, he'd learned long ago, came in many forms. Some people ruled with fear and force. They controlled territories and commanded armies. They built empires that everyone could see. Others ruled with quiet courage. With small acts that no one applauded. With the discipline to act when action mattered. Even when no one was watching. Both kinds of power changed the world. But only one kind created peace. Min-sik sat in the driver's seat, following Ji-hoon's gaze. She's doing well, he observed. She always was, Ji-hoon replied quietly. We just gave her the tools to do it on a larger scale. He watched Iamide laugh, watched Funk smile, watched the community his foundation was building. Some debts could never be fully repaid. Funk had saved his life with silence and instinct. He tried to return the favor with resources and opportunity. But the truth was simpler than debt or repayment. She'd shown him something he'd almost forgotten in his world of calculated moves and strategic power. That courage didn't always announce itself. That the strongest acts were often the quietest. That sometimes, protecting one life quietly mattered more than controlling 1,000 loudly. Sir, Min-sik asked. Should we? No, Ji-hoon said. Let her be. The sedan pulled away from the curb, blending back into city traffic. Funk never saw the car. Never knew Ji-hoon sometimes checked in, quietly ensuring the foundation had what it needed. She didn't need to know. Some protection worked best in silence. She gathered Iamide as the sun began to set, holding his small hand as they walked home. He chattered about his day, about the friends he'd made, about how high he'd climbed. And Funk listened, grateful for every breath he took easily, for every dream he could chase without limitation. That night, as she tucked him into bed in their new apartment, bigger now, safer, in a better neighborhood, Iamide looked up at her with sleepy eyes. Mama, why do you help so many people? Funk smoothed his hair, thinking of a cloudy glass, a dangerous choice, a life that had changed in 60 seconds. Because someone once helped us, she said softly. And because quiet kindness lasts longer than loud power. Iamide nodded, already drifting toward sleep. Funk kissed his forehead and stood in the doorway, watching him breathe peacefully. She thought of her father's words, the ones that had guided her through that impossible night. Silence can kill faster than noise. But she'd learned something else since then. Silence could also save, could protect, could change everything. The world was full of invisible people making impossible choices. People who moved quietly through dangerous rooms. People who acted without applause, who protected without recognition. Who survived by refusing to be seen. Funk had been one of them. Now she made sure they weren't invisible anymore. And somewhere across the city, In a world of calculated power and strategic moves, Ji-hoon worked in his own silence, protecting, planning, ensuring that the foundation continued its work. Two different worlds. Two different kinds of strength. Both understanding, finally, that the quietest acts lasted the longest. That kindness without applause was still kindness. And that sometimes, the most important thing you could do was notice the glass that didn't look right, and act before anyone else knew danger was present. Some people ruled with fear. Others survived with silence. And sometimes, the quietest act changed everything.